And good afternoon. My name is Portia Pratt, and I serve as the Senior Policy Analyst for Post-Secondary Education with the National Governors Association within the Center for Best Practices. And we are really excited to have you all here for a really important conversation about adult literacy and give you all an opportunity to learn about a new report on the adult literacy landscape. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So today we are going to chat about adult literacy broadly, learn about the work that the Barbara Bush Foundation is doing and the work of All In before we dive into this new report focusing on the broader adult literacy landscape and some things that we can learn and some takeaways that can be applied in your states to increase the outcomes for folks who are focusing on adult literacy and pursuing adult literacy programs. So hopefully we'll have a lot of good questions coming because we'll have a Q&A after that. And I'm sure the data that is shared will get you all excited and ready to engage as well. And then we will wrap up. If you have joined any of our conversations before, then you're familiar with some of these housekeeping items, but I will recount them for folks who are new to this NGA conversation. One, this meeting is for attribution. We will be doing a follow-up commentary, and so some of the questions that you all ask, some of what you share about what you're experiencing in your states, in your organizations, we would like to mention, reference in that commentary, and we want to make sure that it's properly, attributed. The chat is open and encouraged. We chose not to do the webinar format for a reason. We would like this to be a conversation. We want this to be an experience where we're learning and sharing best practices, as well as hearing from our speakers and learning from them. So it is highly encouraged. There's a little confusion here about the technical help. It says contact Eric, but provides other email information. But Abby Rim is actually on the line. So if you have any technical issues, feel free to reach out to her. That is her email address, but of course you can message her for more urgent needs. And then, as I mentioned to folks who joined at the beginning, if you can make sure that your screen name is updated with your first and last name, and then the state that you are joining from, or if you are joining from a state or territory that you're joining from, excuse me, or if you're joining from an organization, feel free to update it there as well. And something that is not mentioned here, we will be recording this conversation so you can reference it later, so you can share it broadly for folks who are unable to join us today. And so with that, Abby, if you wouldn't mind getting us started with the recording. Wonderful. And so to get us started, I am going to pass the virtual mic to Andrew Roberts and Sarah Casisio from the Barbara Bush Foundation. So Andrew, take us away.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having us. I'm so thrilled to be here speaking with you today. Thank you to the National Governors Association for the opportunity to shed light on this topic. And I want to particularly thank Mr. Bill McBride, who actually was at the launch of All In at Sunnylands a couple of years ago. So I know he's been a big supporter of literacy, as well as you, Portia. Thank you so much for helping us put this together. So my name is Andrew Roberts. I'm the president of the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. Our organization was actually founded about 35 years ago by Barbara Bush, who realized that literacy was an important foundational issue that addressed so many of the concerns at that time. Today, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization focused on family literacy solutions that help people and communities build a brighter future together through literacy. There's been a lot of attention on literacy recently. I won't bore you with too many statistics, and we'll probably be going through some more soon. But the current state of literacy is a little bit troubling, right? About 28% of adults struggle with basic reading skills. That's about 59 million people. Recent NAEP scores were also released that show kind of a similar trend holds true for school-age kids. About a third of eighth graders and 40% of fourth graders scored below the basic reading level for their age group. And far more than that are kind of behind grade level. So we know that literacy is also a foundational skill that correlates very strongly with other important topics like poverty, healthcare, safety, and others. So while this can kind of feel daunting, solutions do exist, right? They're out there, but they will not be successful in isolation. It will require kind of heightened attention, sustainable funding, and it will also require the cooperation of everyone working together, policy, K-12, philanthropy, even corporations, if we want to kind of turn this around. And so that's why actually a number of years ago at BBF, we brought together experts from across the educational field in all of those different domains to create and launch the National Action Plan for Adult Literacy in 2021. From there, a collective action group led by Barbara Bush Foundation called All In, which is the Adult Literacy and Learning Impact Network, was created that is made up of some of the largest nationwide organizations focused on adult literacy. This group of separate and distinct organizations works together every day to try and make headway on this challenge. And we use the National Action Plan kind of as our blueprint and our path forward to doing that work. We are ultimately trying to increase awareness and access to high quality solutions out there for everyone. So I'm very excited to turn over now to Sarah and Ronelle to speak a little bit more about this work and the recent report that we commissioned that contains some powerful new findings to help us reach those who have a literacy need but are not currently enrolled in any type of support at this time. So Sarah, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. You got me. All right. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and speak with all of you and learn what's going on in your states. Andrew and the Barbara Bush Foundation have been just tremendous leaders in the literacy space. So we're excited to be able to convene together all of these different groups. I am the director of All In, which, as we mentioned, convenes 12 national organizations that are trying to address this issue as a collective. And I'll pass it to Ronelle to introduce herself before we go into learning more about the context of adult literacy in the US.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ronelle Green. I'm a director here at FTI Consulting. I've been working very closely with Sarah and Andrew and the All In team for the past couple years now, actually, on
I was
quite
gonna
a
say
few.
two
Yeah,
years, yeah.
yeah, it's been a while. So we've done quite a bit of research. Very excited to get into it today with you all.
All right. Can go to perfect. So, as Andrew mentioned, we launched the Adult Literacy and Learning Impact Network a couple of years ago, and including Bill McBride, who is there. I just saw that you joined and has been a huge supporter of literacy. Um, our goal was to really expand access to adult literacy across the US. We really view this issue not about individual skills, but as an issue of investment and access. And so our goal is to bring leaders together across sectors to implement the National Action Plan for Adult Literacy. And we're really focused on, as you can see here, which outlines 5 key initiatives. And so we launched the National Action Plan for Adult Literacy in collaboration with Dr. Jill Biden. Our goal is to raise awareness and advocate for change in this space, expand outcomes-focused research, which that's what our topic is on today. Supporting adult literacy instructors, really interesting, but 81% of adult educators are part-time or volunteer staff. So that, creates another kind of interesting challenge to work at in the adult ed space. Our goal is also to catalyze low cost, high impact innovation. There's a lot of exciting things happening in the adult ed ecosystem, but they're not always well known or well communicated across states. So that's something we'd love to work with all of you on more. And finally, engaging adult learners as movement leaders, which really sets the premise for our discussion today. Literacy affects everyone everywhere. That is without a doubt. The newest NAEP data shows that, fourth grade reading, eighth grade reading, and, the most recent international OECD data shows that 28% of adults read at or below level 1, which is the lowest level of adult reading, which means they can only read short, simple sentences, maybe look at a text and locate one single piece of information. So we recognize that it's problematic to always compare children's literacy with adult literacy, given that adults enter, the learning space with all kinds of experiences, background. They have vast knowledge and skill sets, to draw on. However, it really is a foundational literacy need. It's a pervasive challenge and it's affecting so many people across the US. Part of the issue is capacity, but part of the issue is that people do not know about available programs. And that is kind of the exciting part about our work today. Next slide, please. So you can grab your phone. This is a little bit fun, interactive part to get into this topic of literacy. Take a picture of the QR code and find your home state. I see we have some people from Iowa, West Virginia, and a couple of other places, but take a look and look at the literacy rates across your state. This data is from the 2017 PAC data and can also be broken down by county. So you could actually look by county and see what the rates are of low adult literacy in your community. Importantly, the county level data for the 2023 assessment was supposed to come out this April that we can no longer expect given the changes in the federal government. So we're not expecting the county level data just yet or at all. But this is fairly comparable to what you might see today. And in fact, it's probably a little bit worse given the national trends of our data. So we can actually include this in the follow-up notes too. I'm not going to go through each of these, data points, but just a big snapshot of the need. Over 58 million adults have foundational literacy needs. That is 28% of working age adults 16 to 65 in the US. If you're thinking about workforce development, if you're thinking about apprenticeships, if you're thinking about pathways to higher ed, pathways to in-demand skills jobs, you have to consider the population of adults that are working age that have low literacy needs. On that note, 92% of jobs require digital skills, but a third of workers, so you're seeing that number over and over, about a third of workers have low or no digital skills, including in incarcerated settings. We also know there's such a strong connection between adult literacy and children's literacy. So if a parent has low literacy, it's a 72% chance of experiencing low literacy themselves, that child. I happen to be an anomaly. My mother has struggled with literacy her whole life, but thankfully I had access to high quality education, and was able to, overcome that. But that is not the standard. 72% of children with parents with low literacy, repeat those same things. This is a military issue too. So the U.S. military, has struggled to recruit over the last several years in particular because young recruits cannot pass the ASVAB test. So these are, really, really important pieces to consider. And finally, we know there's such a connection between low literacy and health outcomes. People with low literacy are more likely to use emergency rooms, more likely to have adverse health conditions like diabetes or obesity, struggle to, read their medication labels and things like that. And then think about if you're struggling to read your own medication labels. I know I've struggled with amoxicillin with my, 3 and 5-year-old interpreting, all of these different materials that you get. There are real implications for not being able to read at level. Next, please. So the big picture challenge, to take away is that while we have about 28% of the adults in the US reading at or below a third grade level, fewer than 10% of those are enrolled in literacy services. And some people estimate it's more like 4%. So a very tiny fraction of people who need services are actually accessing federally funded services. Why is that? So that's what we wanted to explore with this research and how can we engage more people in these critical resources that are available. So we love ending on this slide because for the context anyway, so we can get into some of the newest research. But this really shows that investing in adult literacy is investing in so many other critical policy areas. So depending on your state, you might be very focused on children's learning. You might be focused on, health and your community, right? Literacy is part of each of these initiatives. We know it can save healthcare costs, and also improve positive health behaviors. Having digital literacy, being able to track your steps, all of that, it's connected. Having a skilled workforce. I mean, this is huge right now. We know there are so many available jobs, in-demand jobs, and employers are struggling to find workers that have that skill level. I think it's something like 68%. For every 100 jobs, only 68 percent of workers have the skills to match. And I'll follow up those exact data points, but it's just there is a mismatch between the jobs available and the skills that people have. But we can close the reading and digital skills divide to help increase higher pay, better business outcomes, and benefits to local economies. I mentioned the piece about national security. It's military recruitment, but it's also being able to distinguish between fact and fiction and understanding material that you're reading. Increasing in voter participation, understanding ballots, understanding what's accessible and available to you in your community. These are all pieces that have the potential to really improve with improving adult literacy. And finally, reducing recidivism. In this area, it's less causal. It's actually, sorry, less correlational. It's actually causal relationship between increasing education for adults who are incarcerated and reducing recidivism on the outside. So cannot stress this enough, how important it is to invest in literacy as you're working on these other issues. And my colleague dropped recommendations that we put together for the U.S. Senate Caucus on Adult Literacy, but also any policy influencers in the field. And to the last slide. So really kind of bringing home what we're doing with All In, which is a key initiative of the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. Our goal is to really center adult learners in this discussion and understand their experience within the whole ecosystem. You know, libraries, health and social services, K through 12, early childhood, you know, we're seeing big cuts now to Head Start, right? These are all connected, and adults, including parenting adults, are at the center of a lot of these challenges. And so investing in working age adults is really critical. But what do they need, right? So I'm going to pass it over to my amazing research colleague, Ronelle Green. We've been working with FTI Consulting for the last 2 years. They've been able to reach people that we never could on our own. So I'll pass it over to you, Ronelle, and we'll also follow up with Portia and share some resources if anyone is interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And firstly, let me just say thank you to everyone and Portia and the NGA team. Thank you for having me here this afternoon, and a big thank you to All In for all of the incredible work. It's always a pleasure joining Sarah to share this work, and I'm particularly excited to share some new findings specific to adults with low literacy skills that we've been working on over the past year. So today I'm first going to start by walking you through some of the key findings from our previous research. We ran 2 waves of research before the phase with adults with low literacy. I'll start with just some key highlights from our DC policy influencer research and also our American employers research. Just some quick highlights before then getting into our new research among adults with low literacy. But before I do that, I'll just leave this on the screen for just a few seconds so y'all can scan this QR code, download the reports. You will find far more detail there than I'll be presenting on today. So just a couple more seconds.
I'll drop it in the chat as well.
Awesome. All right, great. Thanks. So starting with our policy influencer study, I'll explain the methodology for this one. We conducted the survey online among an audience that we call policy influencers. So these are folks who work in at least one of the organizations you see in the little bubbles on this slide. So they're either in Congress, the White House, a federal agency of some kind, a political party, a PAC, a campaign, a think tank, trade association, labor union, or they work in comms or issue advocacy on the Hill. They also have to be active and engaged in the space. We make sure that they read at least 3 Beltway type publications regularly, and they have to pay attention to policies and debates specific to literacy, education, labor, and employment to be screened in and allowed to complete this survey. You'll see that we surveyed 200 policy influencers. We had a good split of political affiliations among the sample, in addition to a range of policy specializations among all of the respondents. You can see that on the right of the screen. So this first slide, I think, is a nice start. We assessed how familiar policy influencers are with adult literacy. So you'll see here that 95% claim to have some level of familiarity with the issue, And that's a huge number. It's certainly a good starting point for any discussion of adult literacy among policy folks. But what's interesting here is the 30%, the dark blue area of the pie chart on the left. Those are the folks who say they are very familiar. And this is the real figure that we want to see increase over time. These are the folks who truly understand the issue and the impact it has on the country. You'll recall all those areas that Sarah mentioned earlier that are directly connected to this issue. So this is the number we really want to see improving over time. And despite most policy influencers saying they know someone who is struggling with literacy issues, which is that 76% figure in the call out box next to the pie chart, only 1/3, that 30%, says they're very familiar. So this could be because adult literacy seems to mean something different to different people. So you'll see that on the right side, there's a notable proportion of policy influencers that think adult literacy means English literacy. And this is far more than those who associate adult literacy with things like comprehension of written material, which you'll see is much lower in the chart, or basic math skills, for example. So adult literacy means more than one thing to this audience, and that's something that we should be mindful of as we go through the rest of the data. At the same time, though, against this backdrop of this varied interpretation of what literacy means, we found that those surveyed greatly underestimate the scale of the issue. And that's even despite most knowing someone who struggles with low literacy. So they know about it, they're familiar, but they're still really underestimating how bad it is. We see here that over half of respondents underestimate the number of Americans who struggle with reading, writing, and doing basic math above a third grade level. What's particularly interesting is that 39% of those who have struggled with literacy issues themselves are also underestimating the scale. So less than 1 in 4 provided a roughly accurate estimate of the rates across the US, despite that number that we saw previously, that 95%. Almost everyone thinks they're aware of the issue, they're familiar with it, but only less than 1 in 4 could give a rough estimate that was somewhat accurate. So right away, we're seeing a pretty significant gap between perceptions and the real world extent of this challenge. And looking over to the right of the slide, you'll see a majority of these policy influencers identified socioeconomically disadvantaged people, undocumented immigrants, and people with criminal records as the top 3 sort of demographic groups that are most likely to exhibit lower adult literacy rates. So from a policy influencing perspective, these are the top groups that will be left behind if nothing is done to address this issue. I'll quickly move on to our employer survey just so we can get to the adults with low literacy. But for our employer study, we surveyed 500 mid to senior level executives who are working for medium and large companies across the US. So think of all the major businesses in your constituencies. These respondents, had to have direct responsibility for hiring, for training, or managing employees to qualify to participate in this study. And for this survey, we wanted to be able to examine the opinion of industry. So we identified 4 key industries to focus on. We started with retail and consumer goods, wholesale and distribution, restaurants, and transportation, all of which typically tend to employ more people who struggle with literacy skills and which don't typically require employees to demonstrate higher educational attainment, such as an undergraduate degree or a graduate degree. So these are the employers who are experiencing the challenge of adult literacy limitations firsthand when they're looking to hire people to empower their staff. So understanding the challenges they face and the benefits that increased literacy can provide were key areas of focus with this study. So I'll quickly touch on some key highlights here as well. Just as we saw with the policy influencer audience, there is significant variation among employers on what adult literacy means. So while half consider adult literacy to mean basic reading and writing skills, a notable percentage consider elements broader than that, which is good. you might have noticed that if we compare both audiences, basic reading and writing and comprehension of written material are far higher in association for the employers than for policy influencers. They were more likely to associate adult literacy with English literacy or financial literacy. So while there is this variation in what adult literacy means, the majority of employers are directly feeling the impact of low literacy. They know what it means. They know it's basic reading and writing skills. And on the right hand side, you'll see that almost all of them are calling it out as a problem, and 4 in 10 call it a widespread problem within their businesses. So this is significant. Next slide is even more significant because this problem is impacting their bottom lines. We asked these respondents what percentage of their revenue they think could be lost due to low literacy among their workforce. Granted, these are estimates, but respondents cited an average loss of nearly 5%, and this equates to about $46 billion a year based on our estimates and our math. And truthfully, we think the real figure is likely to be far higher because if you consider that many employees could be contributing at a much higher level if they had better literacy skills, you realize that these numbers are probably even peanuts, but they're pretty huge. So this point I think is key. We found that nearly 1/3 of employers feel that their employees do not have the minimum level of literacy required to effectively do their jobs. And this is particularly high in a restaurant setting and within wholesale and distribution. This is huge. I can't stress it enough. As we've seen, low literacy does have a clear impact on a company's ability to generate revenue, but it also has a huge impact on the employees themselves, their willingness to take on new challenges or ask for help or step up or take on a promotion. So you'll see some nice quotes on the right-hand side. This was echoed in focus groups that we conducted among adults with low literacy. I'll get to that a bit later again, but some participants mentioned that a lack of confidence in their ability to do their jobs stopped them from wanting to go for promotions or impacted their confidence at work. And that also adult learning programs from their employers helped them learn the skills needed to advance into higher roles, which benefits not just themselves and their families, but these businesses as well. So low literacy is really preventing employees from realizing their full potential. It's impacting productivity, it's impacting the numbers, it's leading to isolation within your communities. So it's really important. And we asked about specific day-to-day impacts, right? So you'll see here on this slide that across the key industries that we surveyed, using digital tools is a top challenge for every industry, which is critical. It's preventing employees from using new tools and processes. It's a real challenge, right? And I mean, it's only going to get worse with the rise of AI and the rise of even newer tools and more powerful tools. So this is really important. Another thing that's really key here is their ability to complete training and development programs. So there are all these programs being run across the US in different states and different neighborhoods and communities, but you have folks who struggle with literacy, so they can't even benefit from the programs at all. And that's a top challenge in 3 of these key industries. I think it makes sense. We could assume that in food and beverage and in restaurants, the trainings are probably more hands-on and less to do with leveraging your literacy skills. But in retail, in transportation, logistics, distribution, these are things where you can imagine there's policy documents, there's manuals, there's sort of like explanatory documents. These folks are really struggling in that regard. So consistent challenges for employers across key industries. It's really important that we start to address these challenges. So I'll just quickly pause here for any questions or reactions, anything that's standing out to folks or not making sense or is surprising. I'm also happy to continue, but wanted to pause. Okay.
I just wanted to add the connection between the last slide that you shared, that all 4 industries mentioned the use of digital tools as a need, And that was at the beginning. I know there's a lot of data here, but 92% of jobs now require digital skills, and a third of workers do not have these skills. So we're just seeing a lot of clear trends, which makes the case easier to make that, investment in digital skills must be part of any kind of workforce development plan in each state.
Sure. All right. So, what do adults with low literacy skills think and experience? As Sarah mentioned earlier, the National Action Plan really highlighted the need to better understand this audience and their perspectives. So, we designed this approach. I want to spend a couple of minutes walking through all the specifics here because we were really driven by the need to ensure we were thorough, robust, and most importantly, accessible in how we conducted this research, which is highlighted here. So the first step was to recognize the need for counsel from a wonderful advisory group of adult literacy experts, many of whom had conducted their own research and published papers about this issue. So their feedback, their contributions, we had some thoughtful conversations. Those were incredibly helpful in creating both our qualitative and quantitative instruments. And this step ensured that we were able to define the audience in the most appropriate and inclusive way and ensure that the topics in the initial focus groups were reflective of the answers and the potential solutions that we're looking to get to. So working with this team, we then recruited and conducted 4 focus groups online, lasting 90 minutes each, ensuring we had representation across generations, as well as a group specifically for job seekers, just to learn more about their unique experiences and their goals and aspirations, perspectives around learning, get their take in their own words. And once we had those insights, we were able to take what we learned from those focus groups to build out a quantitative survey to put numbers to these experiences and their goals and so on. So we wanted to identify what factors could create an effective and engaging adult learning program. And also, that's important, but what's equally as important is ensuring that there's a positive user experience for the respondent taking the survey. So to that end, we ran the survey online and via telephone. So we ran calls as well across the country, as well as through text to cell mobile deployment to ensure we were reaching those who are not online. We fielded the survey in both English and Spanish. The question and answer text was programmed in large, clearly visible size and font for those online. And the questions were written in plain text, which means it was phrased to be very easy to navigate for someone with low literacy. So for instance, there were no complex grid questions, and we took great care to ensure that all the wording we used was very clear, very simple, and it was timed to be no longer than 10 minutes. So very low burden on the respondents. And while we had all of those provisions in place, we wanted to be doubly sure that respondents were comfortable with the survey. So we ran 2 pilot studies, one in English, one in Spanish, to see how people would respond. And we would make adjustments based on their feedback. We had a few extra questions at the end of each pilot asking for their feedback on the experience. For example, we asked, were the questions easy to read and how would they rate the survey? And the results were overwhelmingly positive. We even saw in that phase of the research, just the pilot study, folks saying that they're excited to learn about programs and to sign up. So it was great. And with that, we then moved into full field work and we reached a final sample of 2,000 adults with low literacy across the country. And those are the results that we're going to go through today. So on the demographics of those who took our survey, one of the big takeaways here is the connection between income level and literacy level. You'll notice on the top right that 56% of the 2,000 people we surveyed are earning less than $30,000 a year. And although less than half of the sample were parents of children under 18, we'll see some findings that are specific to them as well later on. For instance, they were more likely to be interested in enrolling in adult literacy programs and to attend classes in person. And as you can see, the sample is distributed consistently across things like gender, generation, ethnicity, employment, region, and locality, be it urban, suburban, or rural, which also led to some distinct findings that we'll get into. But we had very robust quotas based on all the latest national level data on the rates of adult literacy and how that plays out in income and region and so on. I also want to take a moment to go a step deeper into the respondent profile, in particular, their unique characteristics. So 3/4 of those surveyed were not enrolled in adult learning programs. Most did not achieve a high school diploma, and just 1 in 10 say they fully understand English. In the middle here, this is a list of tasks that they find challenging. So understanding different arguments in a long article, for example, is the most challenging, along with very important things like understanding messages from their doctor or reading medicine labels, as Sarah mentioned earlier, using technology to search for information, which we saw from the employers using digital tools is a challenge. So this is the profile. These are truly adults who are struggling in the space. We wanted to hear from them, and I think we learned some great points. So the rest of these slides will illustrate those points. Starting with the good news, almost everyone surveyed acknowledges the importance of improving their skills. Those with learning differences, which is things like dyslexia, for example, or ADHD, are much more likely to say it's very important, as are those with no educational attainment whatsoever, as well as younger folks, those who are seeking jobs, and even those with some education as well. So the importance is there. They know that it's critical that they improve their skills. And that motivates them, right? So from a personal perspective, gaining confidence is the #1 benefit of learning. Being able to feel confident and better about oneself is significant. We heard this in the focus groups as well. There's a lot of emotional attachment to their self-perception of how they feel about learning, right? And their literacy skills. There's some shame, there's some stigma. It's a bit of a challenge. So addressing that leads to improved confidence, and that's the top benefit, which we saw in the survey as well. And outside of this, as the primary reason, being able to manage tasks better, meet new people, use technology effectively and safely are also very important areas of personal potential. But then we also looked at this from a professional standpoint, and getting more work done and having the ability to collaborate better with colleagues really lead the way here. Now, this is a big slide because they want to learn, they recognize how important it is to learn, they see the benefits, but awareness of learning programs is extremely low. Just 20% have heard about these programs and are knowledgeable about them. However, when we asked whether they would be interested in enrolling in learning programs, 84% said they would be interested, and 1 in 3 would be very interested. And again, we see here those with learning differences, the younger learners, women as well, and parents, again, are more likely to show that strong interest in enrolling in adult learning programs. So what areas in particular do adult learners want to prioritize? Better communication is key, that's the top one, and also understanding more words. Those are the top 2 choices. And the latter in particular is a focus for older learners, which you can see in the sort of light blue bar at the back. Those are the Gen X, boomers, and older. Those are the learners. And it's really important for them to understand more words and be able to better communicate. We see that they're over-indexed on most of these skills that they want to improve. Younger learners over-index on public speaking and finances. The older learners, again, like I mentioned, over-index across the board, but heavily in digital literacy. So whether that's using technology or writing emails. And interestingly, we heard this in the focus groups, it was very surprising. 1 in 5, that bar to the right of the slide, 1 in 5 want to improve their penmanship. And this increases to a quarter of younger learners. So it was very interesting to hear that in the focus groups, is that folks not only want to understand more words and be able to better communicate, but even if they write themselves a grocery list or notes from a meeting and so on, they struggle to go back and actually read what they wrote. So that's part of this as well. So the problem here, though, is that there is this perception of high program cost. So we have to be really mindful of the perceived barriers for adult learners to enroll. Perceived cost of the program is significant, and this is consistent across all learners, parents, younger learners, older learners, and those who are less concerned about the cost of the programs often face other hurdles, including their fear of failure, the second bar here, lack of confidence, or simply constraints on their time and travel abilities. I think one that stood out for me is not knowing anyone else in the program, which is the rightmost bar. It sort of really underscores the importance of having a friendly face, someone who's encouraging, a person to help you get through the fear and the emotions and the shame that we heard in the focus groups that I mentioned earlier, and to help provide support and answers to questions along the way. So I think you'll see throughout this presentation and throughout the report that has been recently published that human touch really is key in removing these barriers. So on program design, most adults with low literacy would prefer to have some independent learning time, which goes back to what I mentioned that we heard in the focus groups. The stigma, the emotional attachment to learning as an adult, it's a challenge. So learning while being perceived as learning is even more of a challenge. You know, you sort of just want to learn and improve your skills and not be seen as somebody who is struggling. So we saw that learning by oneself was the top choice here, but a close second is a mix of both learning with a teacher and learning independently. And notably, you'll see in the call out boxes, these preferences are driven by location. So as you think of your constituencies, those in more rural areas, for example, will need more of that independent time, assuming they think that that's what they can access based on where they live. But those in the suburbs are more likely to prefer that mix, and those who need extra help with learning. So those who have learning differences like a dyslexia or ADHD, for example, or parents, they really want that specific learning time with a teacher. They need that hands-on guidance. Most also want some sort of hybrid arrangement. So much like the independent learning point, the top preference here on the left is actually online classes, driven again by those rural respondents or those with higher income, which lines up a bit with something we saw earlier, where those with a diploma were more likely to prefer independent learning. Online classes is then followed by a hybrid approach with some online and some in-person classes. And again, just under a quarter want strictly in-person classes. So these tend to be the people in the cities, again, those with learning differences, and younger learners, which at first I was surprised to see that. But then if you think about it, they probably are experiencing some online fatigue in general, and especially post-COVID and so on. So that in-person option is key for those groups. And assuming the programs were hybrid, on the right-hand side, roughly 8 in 10 said that they would attend the in-person classes at least sometimes. And that 8 in 10 is split between always attending or only attending sometimes. So that's a pretty good rate. And we see that those who are learning English as a second language, graduates, younger learners, and parents, again, are driving the share of people who said they would always attend. So again, these key groups are most likely to benefit from these in-person programs. They want the direct hands-on help and guidance. But the independent learning is also important. The online options are also important. So designing programs with all of these preferences in mind is key to ensure that they work and that these adults with low literacy stay engaged and they're able to benefit from the programs. So to the point about keeping them engaged and ensuring that they can benefit, one of the key strategies here is sort of just focusing on that people element. I mentioned earlier the human touch is really important for this group. I'll emphasize it here again because it's really critical. 63% is pretty significant. Most would be motivated by stories of other people who have successfully improved their skills. And that includes people who share their background or people who don't. This group just wants to hear that it has been done before, it's possible. That's what they find most motivating. And additionally, encouragement and the chance to interact with other learners are notable motivating factors and very important considerations as we think through how we develop these programs and market them now and moving into the future. The human touch is really key across the board. We heard it in the focus groups, we saw it throughout the survey findings. So those people-focused strategies are key. So overall, long story short, what did we find? There is huge potential here. We can solve this problem. Adults with low literacy have overwhelmingly positive feelings toward learning. They understand how it can unlock their potential. One of the most insightful findings here is that most don't know about programs at all. A huge amount of those respondents would be interested in these programs if they had the opportunity to attend, if they knew about them, and in particular, those younger people, those with learning differences, parents. But with that said, there is a widespread perception that these programs come with a high cost. There's a strong fear of failure. There's a deep emotional element to this. And those are the biggest barriers standing in the way of their potential enrollment. And moving to the bottom row, adults with low literacy want hybrid options. They're interested in about 2 to 3 classes a week, ranging from 30 minutes to 2 hours per class. And the role of a supportive teacher in a small group setting is very important. It came up in both the focus groups and the survey. It's critical to participation and to continued learner engagement. The human touch, again, critical across the board. So those people-focused strategies, the storytelling, the success stories, those will be key in improving rates across these states, across the US. The full report is here. There are a few blog pieces, I believe, on the All In website. There's social assets being posted out. There's a nice video that I think you'll get as a follow-up to this. So there's a lot of good data in the report. I only covered key highlights in that presentation just now, so definitely take a look. And I will pause here. I'll let Portia chime in, but please do raise the issue with your governors. It's impacting literally every other issue that you all are working on, both directly and indirectly, as Sarah mentioned at the start. It's very important. But any questions?
Thank you, Sarah and Renelle, for that important information and for those highlights out of the report. I have read part of it and now I'm like, oh, I need to read the rest so I can catch all the gems that Renelle did not share. So yes, are there questions? They've posed questions throughout, but wondering how this resonates with you all, what you all are experiencing in your state or territory. If you have a story to share, or if you have a model to share with the group that's on the call now. Right. There are a couple of questions in the chat, so I'll start there and hopefully that'll trigger some questions from you all. So Sarah, Renelle, how do we reach adults with low literacy in states and territories? You talked a lot about your survey methods, and I'm sure that folks that are operating at the policy level are wondering, well, what is it that I can do, or who should I talk to, or where are you seeing the greatest impact? Is there anything that you all can share about that?
Sure, I can start through All In. One of our members is the National Association for State Directors of Education. which is called NASDAQ. Every state operates a little bit differently. In some cases, the adult education programs are through the community college system. In Maryland, my home state right now, it's through Department of Labor. In other places, it's through a workforce um, organization, or in more than half is through K through 12 Department of Ed. And so it's really important to find out, one, where your adult education programs are housed in your state. And I dropped into the chat a link to the National Association of State Directors of Adult Ed. You can find fact sheets in your state about how many people are without a high school diploma, which is also was always a great place to start, and also find out who your state director of adult ed is, what they're doing. One of the things we found, as Ronell shared, is we need way better communication and outreach methods. A lot of adult ed programs post on their websites ESL classes. A person that is new to the country doesn't know what ESL means. That is English as a second language, but we should be just communicating English skills or workforce skills. Another huge, simple, but transformative finding is that the term basic is really off-putting to people. So if you say we offer basic classes, people I'm not basic, right? I have a lot of skills in different areas. I'm a parent, I'm doing a lot. So if you frame it more as workforce skills or as foundational skills, digital skills, right? The framing of these programs is really important so that people feel that it connects with them and resonates with their life. But we did learn that people really do connect to stories. So if you can leverage social media, use testimonials from existing learners of how they found out about programs, and we're able to connect with their providers in their community. So that's a huge piece of it, is more storytelling, more examples of what works, more testimonials, and just more outreach from the programs themselves. We are still hugely reliant on word of mouth in adult ed. That's both for adult teachers and learners. And so it's very much like a grassroots community type of program, but there are ways that we can integrate it more effectively into our K through 12 space, having teachers engage with parents of children who may be struggling. That could be an indicator that the parent themselves struggles with literacy. Not always, but it could be. So these are just things that we can, you know, think about in terms of access points to adult education.
That was going to be my point, Sarah, is just remembering those key groups that we touched on in the report. So the parents is really important, that community sort of approach. Those with learning differences, think of like your doctor offices, think of your churches, all of these gathering spaces in communities and neighborhoods that bring families in, parents in. Think about all of those spaces because these folks are everywhere.
Thank you, Renelle and Sarah. You make a great point, and it makes me think about two-generation programs. So programs that provide that education to little ones and their caregivers at the same time. So sometimes learning beside one another is a great motivator. Head Start programs are kind of coming up for me as a Center for Adult Basic Ed as well. So, and I think you're right. Calling it basic education is not appealing. I don't think any of us would want to be in that program. And I don't think that really accurately describes what is happening in those programs. So sounds like we need to do a brainstorm at some point
Yes,
and call it something else.
it's marketing and communications. Like, we
Mhm.
are educators, so we're not great at marketing and communications. And that's a funding piece too. We don't always have staff members, in adult ed programs who have those skills. So that's why this kind of work is so important, because we're collaborating with groups like FTI, people across sectors to help us kind of rejuvenate the adult ed space and think about the problem in a little bit different of a light. I
Yeah.
think for a long time, adult education has been kind of this siloed, tight-knit community.
Mhm.
But we really need to work more effectively with employers, with libraries, and, with everyone, really, policy influencers, governors, all of it.
I agree. And we do have time for one more question. So hopefully just a quick answer. But you kind of led me into it with the employer piece. I think a huge aspect of this conversation has to do with the engagement with employers and who's going to pay for this. And I think it automatically, as we're talking about working adults, goes to the employer. So I'm wondering if y'all can shed some light on employers' willingness to invest in these foundational skills.
I think they're willing to invest. They see the challenge, they see how it impacts their bottom lines. I think the challenge is the know-how, right? So you sort of can't just throw money at this problem. They need adult educators. They need people in the space who are experts who understand how to design programs. So that's the challenge is partnering with them. I know Sarah and team has experience with big sponsors of programs, and they've been running good programs within their businesses. I'm thinking of Dollar General as one good example. But it's the know-how that they need, right? The expertise and the specifics in the programs. So it's good that they recognize the issue and would be interested in solving it. It's just how do we help them do it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, like there are some really foundational or trainings that could be offered to learning and development teams and employers. For example, explicit vocabulary instruction, or if you're working with an adult who discloses they have dyslexia, you might want to make sure they are able to understand the material or review it on average 7 times, right? So there are little tips and strategies that you can use to support or giving them additional time if you're doing an online training module, right? So my own mom has dyslexia and worked in early child care for many years. And she called me in a panic one day and said, they're asking me to do modules. I don't know what modules are. I said, Mom, just tell them you have dyslexia, that you need more time, that it doesn't affect your intelligence. I'm telling her what to say to advocate, but also employers need this knowledge of how to communicate with potential employees about the skills they might need. And so there is a stigma here. Employers don't always want to admit that their workers may have low literacy, right? So it's back to that branding. It's
Yeah.
not that your workers are dumb. We have to be really careful, but there are foundational skills, digital skills, upskilling. These are hot topics that are not stigmatized, and we can integrate literacy in those pathways, I would say.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are close on time, so we don't have any more time for questions, unfortunately. But Renelle, Sarah, Andrew, thank you all. Thank you for this really important work, and thank you for sharing it with us. For folks who were able to join us today, you see email addresses there. If you have any questions, need any follow-up information, feel free to reach out to any of us. And something that I'll mention as a part of NGA's kind of commitment and interest in adult basic education. We are actually partnering with COABE, the Coalition on Adult Basic Education, for an edition of their journal, which will come out this fall. And it will focus on some of the ways that states and territories and leaders are leveraging state policy and funding and those opportunities to advance programs that benefit adults, working adults, adults in literacy program, adults in basic education. And we would love for folks who are on this call to either submit or share it with someone who has some experience, some best practice that they would like to share with governors and other leaders related to this topic. I will drop the chat with more information about how to submit to that journal here. The deadline is approaching. It is on May 12th. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me about that. And otherwise, thank you so much again to our speakers, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. We will follow up with the information shared shortly after this meeting.
Thank you. And thank you, Portia,
Of
and
course.
everybody
Thank
for
you.
joining the topic. Thank you.
Thanks.